we only need 500 a day. Too much sodium damages the system. So when I work with the patient, usually the patients I work with are two types. One of the types that the surgeons send to me, I work with the surgeons and they can't do anything with them. The arteries are too diseased, too small, in bad locations, so they're not candidates for stents. They're not candidates for bypass surgery. They already have medical management. They're usually from 40 to 50 years old. They can't walk across the room because of having chest pain. So that's one group that I work with, and they're very interested in doing everything to help the arteries do better, to see if we can reverse or at least slow down this aging process that's going on, which is a combination of genetics and the stressors. The question I get asked probably the most as people are working on this is, can you identify via some metric which stressor is the worst for me? You know, for some people, we want to work on, of course, you want to work on the worst stressor first. It's very hard. And right now, we don't have any metrics that do this, but usually I get a feel from doing a family history and talking to them what the worst stressor is. And the stressor could be not sleeping well at night, having interpersonal stress, a cigarette stress. The stresses come from all over. Often they turn on the same physiology, which is adrenaline, cortisol, and inflammation, which accelerate the aging of this inside lining, which is called the endothelium. So that's sort of a brief introduction to what I do. So that's one type of patient. The other type of patient I get is the ones that are sent to me that don't want to have modern medicine at all. They don't want to have procedures, and they want someplace to go. And there's many different reasons that people do that. I see Jehovah's Witnesses probably the most because they don't want to take blood transfusions. And surgeons and people don't like to do procedures when if they do something to cause bleeding, they could cause sudden death. So that's a group that I see quite a bit. I also see the surgeon's patients that they say, listen, this guy's not a candidate to have anything ever done on his arteries again. We bypassed him. We spent a lot of hours and time with this. Can you work with him so he doesn't have the grafts fail in the next 3 to 5 years? Vein grafts that we use do not last very long unless you take care of them. So when we talk about a bypass surgery, we don't take any blockages away. We don't take disease away. We just bypass south of the artery. We bring a new conduit with new blood south of the blockage. So bypass surgeries do not prevent a heart attack. They really give you a secondary blood supply, so if you do have an emergency, you have some insurance. And the risk, of course, is up front of having the surgery. The stents are great if you're having a blocked artery. If you're having a heart attack, I had a 31-year-old that came in Thursday at 1:31. I walked into the room, and he was grabbing his chest. He had a history of a disease called ankylosing spondylitis, which is an inflammatory disease. So I knew right off that even though he was 31, he had inflammation, so he was aging his arteries already. And doing his genetic history, he had already had thyroid cancer and his thyroid removed in his mid-20s. So that combination was aging his vessels. So I knew when I walked in the room that he was having a heart attack in the LAD. That's a proximal vessel. So we took him to the cath lab and put a stent in. So he's going to have the discussion down the road. Well, the stent opened up the artery and helped it acutely, but we didn't fix the disease process. So this might be a better talk about, I maybe should have named it, instead of disease reversal, disease modification. And I think if I had to rename this, that's what I call it, disease modification. So I'm praying that this will move to the next slide. Yes, it does. Okay. Is disease reversible possible? Yes, it is in certain situations. And those certain situations are a lot of it's genetically determined and which condition that you have. Some things we can modify, but it's going to stay with you. The things that I see the most that are turnaroundable is type 2 diabetes, obesity, hypertension, and some slowing down of cardiovascular disease. The patients that are able to reverse cardiovascular disease, I found in working with them, and I also went up to the Cleveland Clinic and worked with Esselstyn for a while. It's so intense that most people cannot do it and become happy. It's just such an intense program. No fat at all in a diet, okay? That's pretty intense, okay? Never processed food, never. Really less than 500 milligrams of sodium a day. And some people can do that and be happy. And the people that can do it and be happy are the ones that can reverse it. But I found the people that do it and unhappy, the unhappiness and the stress from doing it sort of counteract some of the benefits. Because remember, stress turns on the same chemistry to some degree. And for some people, the stressors are different. I had one person that I worked with, his was a no-brainer. His stress was he was doing methamphetamines. As soon as we got him off methamphetamines, his arteries cleared up pretty quick, okay? But other people are more tricky. Some people can be a combination of genetics and worry, or genetics and loss of sleep, or dehydration, or anything that causes stress chemistry which turns on inflammation. Which brings us, we also had some bad inflammatory conditions the last year, and I'm going to talk about that as well. So is disease possible? It is. Here we go. And that's a light green. So can we go to the next one, guys? Up there. Help me out. Just next one. Okay. So here's the ones that we think we can do something with. Type 2 diabetes, not so much with type 1. Hypertension, I think I mentioned that. You know, you come in with your blood pressure high. Most people do not know it. And that's really something that's worth reversing, because hypertension is a risk factor of damaging the endothelium, which goes to every organ in the body. The World Health Organization says hypertension is one of the largest risk factors for death that we have. So we don't want to have high blood pressure. It's just not a good thing. Of course, cardiovascular disease, as I mentioned, in certain situations, obesity, these are ones that can be reversed. Inflammation. Yes, in many cases, and the reason I say we can reverse it is because we can actually have metrics where I can measure inflammation in the body. C-reactive proteins, SED rates, there's different ways we can measure inflammation, and we can make changes either in diet, nutrition, or anti-stress measures, and we can actually measure the level of inflammation later. So that is something that I would say inflammation can be reversed. And also now we have this new situation, the COVID-19, which has damaged the endothelium as well. We're working on strategies to reverse some of the damages that's been done by the spike protein, and getting spike protein also through vaccines that seem to have been damaging the bodies, especially the cardiovascular system. So when we talk about disease reversal, it all goes back, a lot of it goes back to our DNA. And our DNA is sort of so important. That's what tells our body what to do. That's what ages us. That's what we're doing to see if we can change things. We can look at the DNA. We're now able to insert things into the DNA through CRISPR technology. We talked a little bit about that last night. We're able to cut out things that are damaging us. Remember, the DNA makes proteins, enzymes that regulate the body. So it's all happening on that level. And a few years ago, the book that was written, The Language of God, and in this book, Francis Collins suggests that the language of God, he speaks through DNA. Because the DNA is what codes us for who we are. It's what codes us for how we think. And he talks about this, and it's only been the last few years that we could actually understand and unwrap DNA. When I was in school at the University of Texas, taking genetics classes, they had not sequenced the DNA. And that was a few years ago, in the early 80s. But now they've sequenced the DNA. So we now know what the DNA is doing. Not too long ago, we didn't have the term epigenetics. Have anyone heard that? That's all of the factors that are outside the genes that affect the genes. Things that might turn on genes that help suppress tumors. Genes that might turn on inflammation. Genes that might cause personality changes. Genes that might code for different chemicals in the body. So we now are exploring this DNA and studying in disease states what is the abnormality in the DNA and are people at risk. And I guess the one we've heard from the most is the BCR gene. Remember, for breast cancer? We now can look at that gene, and people that have that gene, we know that they're at a higher risk of having breast cancer. But and you've seen all of the advertisements on this genetic testing, right? So it's getting more advanced, and they're commercializing it more and more. And sooner or later, they're going to claim, if you give us your DNA, we're going to be able to tell you what diseases you're prone for and what diseases you might get. And there's some psychiatric diseases that come on later in life that it's very controversial. Would you want to know if at age 50 you're going to have a psychiatric disease based on your genetics? Would you want to know that? Would you live your life any different? If you know that everyone in your family had a gene for Alzheimer's and you were going to have problems at a certain age, would you live your life different? Would you know that if you were going to pass down a genetic mutation to your offspring, would you choose not to have children? So this is a very subject that's going to get a lot of attention in the future, and there's going to be a lot of ethical decisions. And we've seen already that when we manipulate DNA, some good things can happen, but also some things that are unexpected to happen. Because if this is the language of God, how can we really understand the language of God? Are we treading on areas that maybe we should be very careful treading on? So now we have a new player in the game, and the new player in the game is computers and artificial intelligence, which can take data and analyze data, including DNA data, very quickly. We know about digital technology. Digital technology is out there. We now have the ability to take people's thought patterns and digitalize them and digitalize memories. That's now being started. But they're going to take a next jump pretty soon, and the physicists are telling me that the next jump is going to be into quantum physics, quantum computers that are even faster and more advanced than anything that this cell phone can do. It can handle data, including DNA data, at remarkable speeds. So you can see why, to understand a little bit about DNA epigenetics, it's going to affect this aging process, disease modification, disease reversal. Already, the drug companies are jumping on this like crazy. Okay? A lot of the new medicines that we have out that you see are DNA modifying drugs. They're called biologics. The vaccines were ones that they were mRNA type medicines. They were a DNA type medication as well. So within the DNA, at the tips of the chromosomes are parts of the chromosome that's called a telomere. Has anyone heard of a telomere? Okay. Telomeres is one of the ways that people are now looking at how they're physically aging. So we want long telomeres and not short telomeres. And it has to do with cell death and when cells die and how they're functioning. So nowadays, there's some people that are doing all of these, quote, healthy things, and they can modify the telomeres, how much they're changing each year to see if they're aging faster than 1 year per year or less. So there's some guys that are out there that do everything that they think to slow down aging, and that's a whole different lecture of how you slow down aging, but the properties have some similar characteristics. So they try to slow down aging by doing things like anything antioxidants. Some people are using cryotherapy to slow down aging. Of course, nutrition, exercise, intermittent fasting. These are all ways to slow down the shrinking of the telomeres. And so what they will do is they'll measure their telomeres every year, and they say, well, last year I aged at 0.86 of a year. So I'm winning this one, you know. No one I've ever seen got it to 0, okay? And someone say, well, last year my telomeres, based on the shortening time and the analysis, I aged 1.5 year in 1 year. So the technology, and some people really are into this. okay? And it's like an obsession to them. In fact, they're so interested on slowing down their aging process that I think they forget to live sometimes. But it's a whole new technology that you're hearing about as we are able to look at DNA, see how it's changing, see how the epigenetics affects the DNA. And the way I think about epigenetics is you have the hardwiring of our body. That's sort of the DNA, the hardwire. But when you plug in all these programs, that's sort of the epigenetics that affect the hard drive. And epigenetics are what turn on and off certain sequences on our DNA. Usually the epigenetics can be changed a lot by the things that we do in our life and the way we think. Okay, so this is what I'm actually interested in, and I'm learning as much as I can about this lining of a blood vessel. And that's the disease I get, and it's called plaque formation and clots within arteries. And remember, the arteries and the veins go everywhere in the body. And there's a one-cell lining of every blood vessel in the body, in the capillaries, as well as our lymphatic system, and it's called the endothelium. And the endothelium is the largest organ in the body. It has a communication system, and it's in charge of moving things in and out of the body, including waste. And it also affects the function of clotting. If the endothelial malfunctions, you have fat that's developing in that artery. You can see that yellow, that is fat. And if it becomes unstable, which it frequently does, all of a sudden you have clotting, atheromas in that artery. If it goes to the heart and you start having acute problems, you have heart attacks and angina. If it goes to the brain, you have stroke. If it damages the larger vessels, you can have all sorts of problems, including dissections and blood clots throughout the body. So anything that damages the endothelium can accelerate disease. So that's why I was mentioning earlier that, stents are great for certain situations and bypasses are great, but I always wanted to know why this has happened in the first place. Why is the endothelium damaged? And would my patient or that person I'm taking care of be interested in finding out ways to keep the endothelium as healthy as possible? So the real core of medicine, cardiovascular disease, strokes, is going to be lying in the secrets, the DNA secrets, and how to regulate this one-cell lining endothelium so it doesn't malfunction. And we are just now learning about the endothelium, but there's not a lot of studies that are being done on the endothelium. Well, why wouldn't you want to fix the problem? Think about it. If we fix the problem, guess what? What's going to happen with stents and bypasses? And strokes? And medicines for hypertension and cholesterol? What's going to happen to that? So there's really no impetus financially, I think, to explore this. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. And we've learned a few things that I've been able to apply to my people with chronic disease that helps them slow down or modify disease in the coronaries, in the brains for those that are having memory losses, and in other organs, the peripheral organs that are having a symptom that's called claudication. And there's some things I want to share with you today that helps the endothelium. There are some things that hurt the endothelium. But if you can improve your endothelium, you're going to modify all disease. Now, whether you can reverse all disease, unknown. So this is the endothelium. And a couple things that we do know about the endothelium is the endothelium is regulated by a gas called nitric oxide. You've heard nitroglycerin, right? This is a nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is sort of the chemical mediator that regulates this endothelial organ and its function. So it's regulated, so we want lots of nitric oxide. Why do we want more nitric oxide in our body? Well, nitric oxide helps the arteries dilate, get bigger. Nitroglycerin, arteries get bigger. It helps the smooth muscles get bigger. If an artery gets bigger, lowers blood pressure, less stress on the blood vessels throughout the body. It also helps the blood vessels, the more nitric oxide you have, trigger factors where you actually grow new blood vessels. That's called angiogenesis. It can help, nitric oxide levels help as inflammatory mediators by fighting bacteria. It helps the platelets not stick together so you don't have clotting in the vessels. It actually can help high nitric oxide even deal with different types of tumors. So nitric oxide is a good thing. So how do we get more nitric oxide in the body? And what causes less nitric oxide in the body? Well, one of the things that really deplete nitric oxide is cigarettes. You know, we don't want cigarettes are bad for every blood vessel throughout. But things that increase nitric oxide production are things that increase the chemical called L-arginine. It works through an L-arginine pathway. So we want to have lots of nitrates, foods with nitrates in them. What are foods with nitrates in them? Well, arugula is a green with a high nitrate composition. Almost all greens have some, nitrates have a lot. These are the ones that are actually studied scientifically. What about beets? Beets are high in nitrates. So nitrates get transformed into nitric oxide, which is a gas that doesn't stay around very quickly. We can't really measure nitric oxide levels, but we can see its effect by measuring sizes of blood pressure and blood pressure at different times. We know some things cause nitric oxide to be depleted. And the things that cause that, in addition to cigarettes, are fats, lots of sodium, processed foods. Unfortunately, it hurts our nitric oxide ability, so when no nitric oxide, we're going to damage our endothelium, we're going to accelerate the endothelial damage. That's why most cardiologists now will try to talk to their patients about plant-based diets, where they eat more greens and beans and beets, do more walking. Now, walking helps even in different areas. It helps nitrate oxide production, but walking and moving, we were designed to move. And when things move, our bone marrow is stimulated, and now we can measure a chemical called these endothelial progenitor cells. These are cells that are made by our bone marrow that actually try to fix endothelium that's damaged. And we can get that, we increase that level the most by walking. There's no medicine that I know that can do that, but we increase that endothelial, now you could inject bone marrow into people if they had that in them, but that's not feasible. So that's why walking is so important. It helps the nitric oxide production. It also increases the endothelial progenitor cells, which helps the endothelium repair itself. So we are just now learning about this fascinating organ, the endothelium, what regulates it and what hurts it. Who has even heard of the endothelium before? A few of you have. But it's something that doesn't get headlines. You know, it just doesn't get talked about that much. And the people that are interested in this, we call ourselves endotheliologists. Okay? How many have ever gone to see an endotheliologist? No one. Okay? It's sort of a new field. But I think I can make an argument for some people it's a very beneficial thing to do to understand what you might be doing that hurts your endothelium and continue to learn about it in case you might be one that wants to do something to proactive to either modify disease or worse, or get rid of the disease. Talking about disease modification. So here is an inflammatory cell and DNA, and we've heard a lot about inflammation. And inflammation for the aging process and the things we've talked about, telomeres and endothelium, inflammation is bad, period. Okay? So we want as little inflammation, activation of the immune cells as possible. It damages DNA. So in talking about inflammation, we can measure that. Okay? I can tell if a person has inflammation pretty much by talking to them. If they have, I have lots of joint pains, lots of aches, I know they have inflammation, okay? And we want to talk about strategies to turn down inflammation because we know that when inflammation goes down, DNA isn't hurt as much, the body's regulated better. When inflammation is turned down, we have less pain. Pain creates adrenaline, it creates cortisol, and a lot of this creates blood clots. Because what does the body want to do when it's stressed out? It inflames itself. You cut yourself, right? And initially you're going to start bleeding. And the body says, bleeding is not good. I'm going to turn it red. I'm going to inflame itself, and that's going to call in my clotting factor so I can clot it off. Well, this is great occasionally on the skin or if you're bleeding somewhere, but is it a good thing to constantly be going on in your body and including the blood vessels? So this inflammatory response in the blood vessel, if it goes on long enough, it's severe enough. In my patient, his ankylosing spondylitis was not being managed, and he had terrible inflammation levels, and I know this triggered to making one of his fat that was stored in damaged endothelium because he just took too much fat in, and he had a plaque that ruptured, and he had an acute MI at age 31. The milieu was there for something bad to happen. No one had even mentioned this before. He had a 1.5-year-old, and just been married for 4 or 5 years. He's in the hospital right now in Chattanooga. I'm just hoping we opened up that artery in time so his muscle is not lost forever. And that varies. He's 31, so usually they can do okay for a few hours without any blood flow to the heart before they have permanent damage. So in modern medicine, there's a place for it. But in my 35 years of practicing, modern medicine is great for emergencies. It's great for parts that are worn out. Okay? It's really good for those things, and it's great for helping symptoms. Lifestyle medicine is really good for slowing down disease, reversing some situations, but I found in my experience for many people, it's very hard. It's very hard. And a lot of my patients will not change until they have no other options and their quality of life is so poor that they won't do anything else. Well, I'm arguing I wish people would do that a little bit earlier. So inflammation is not good. Now, we have medicines that can cut back inflammation. And most of this inflammatory response we can cut back acutely right away with things like steroids. We have anti-inflammatories for certain medical conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, and things like Motrin will even turn down the inflammatory response. Deep breathing will turn down the inflammatory response. Adequate hydration will turn down somewhat. Walking will turn it down somewhat. Eating fruits, vegetables, nuts, and grains will turn down the inflammatory response to a certain degree. So there's many different avenues that people don't even think about to turn down inflammation in the body. And I just want to make the point here that inflammation is just not a good thing to have. Now lastly, so we have a lot of things that we talked about that are tough on the body. And in disease modification, there's some things that we can do. But I think in working with people through years, the one thing that I want to point them to is the real source of disease reversal. And we talked about that earlier. And the key to health is Christ. He's promised that he's going to heal us in his time if we walk and grow with him. So I try to move everyone in that direction first. Christ is the key to healing. He gives you the power to do the things you want. And then I try to give them biblical prescriptions, biblical promises that will also help some of these processes slow down that we've talked about. And I go through some of the text. Does anyone have their Bible with you today? Okay, who wants to read that text for me? Read it out loud, nice. 1 Corinthians 15:52. So whoever can get it first, stand up and read it for us. As loud as you can. Go ahead. 1 Corinthians 15:52, and I hope the slide's correct. Is there a 52? I might have made the slide.
52. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for a trumpet will sound, and the dead will raise incorruptible, and we shall be changed.
Okay. Isn't that a good biblical prescription? In the twinkling of an eye, we're going to be made perfect, according to this text. And if we went into it, I can prove that the Bible is true. And, believing God's promises and accepting them and believing, that's part of faith. And that's a wonderful promise for all of us that have bad genes, that are suffering, that are gradually getting older. You know, that's something that we know. It's not always going to be this way, because just hope itself decreases stress. We know from studies that people that have a spiritual background have less inflammation, less chronic disease than those don't. We also know that people that live in fear and anxiety have higher levels of inflammation, and they have more chronic disease. So here's another one. How about Ezekiel 36:26? Does anyone find that one for me? Ezekiel 36:26. It's almost like a sword drill, you know? Ezekiel 36:26. Let's see how we can apply that to chronic. Yes, sir.
A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you an heart of flesh.
Okay, so that's good, right? We are getting something brand new. Doesn't say where, when, or how for each individual, but we're promised that. Philippians 3:21. Who would like to read Philippians 3:21 for us? And we have a microphone now too. So just raise your hand, Philippians 3, verse 21. Okay, there's a hand right back there.
Philippians 3:21, who shall change our vile body, that it may be fashioned like unto his glorious body, according to the working whereby he is able even to subdue all things unto himself.
Okay, another beautiful biblical prescription that I want us to focus on, the big picture here. We're going to have sorry bodies here. You know, we can do what we can to make them better, but we're going to have problems as we stay here on this earth long enough. And the real solution, the real option for disease reversal is going to be Christ, is a real option. He also gives us the power to see what things we can modify. So let's read. This is one of my favorite texts, Revelation 21, 1 through 5. So who would grace us with reading Revelation 21, 1 through 5? Here's a gentleman right here. Wait, we got the microphone. We want everyone to hear you.
Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Also there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. And the verse 5, then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful.
Okay. Well, that's a wonderful promise. And I guess, you know, do we believe that the Bible is true? Do we believe that it applies to our health? I say I do. And that's in just believing and having that relationship and having that hope and going through the process of worship changes our physiology for the good. Not only for the short term, but for sure for the long term. So we do know that when people relax, when people that worship, there's studies out there on worship, just 10 minutes a day. People that worship change inflammation and some of the chemistry of our body. We know that stress is not good, and we know that people that have faith and hope tend to have less stress and anxiety, which counteracts some of the things on our body that we've talked about today. I've simplified it a great deal. But this is much more complicated, and you're going to hear about it more in the future. But I did want to touch on this mainly to focus us on what real disease reversal is about. When you hear more and more of this in the media about, I can take this and shorten my telomere. You know, well, I can take Jesus and be healed forever. So why do you know, let's talk about that for a little bit, huh? And I can prove that the Bible's true. I can prove that there's biblical prescriptions that I can apply to my life and not only improve it here, but improve it forever. And I can tell people that this is something that we can take to the bank. That was the real point I wanted to make today, and also let you know that as we move on, things are going to get more complicated and more blurred. There's going to be more fear, and there's going to be supernatural things that are going to be out there that are going to, quote, make people live long and live better. But I would look at all of these very, very carefully and look at through the lens of the Bible. So as we go today, I want to leave you with 3 or 4 practical things that you can do to start modifying whatever disease that's in your body that will help out. These are some simple things that are practical. One is get up and move every hour while you're awake. So if you sit at a desk or a computer desk, or get up and move every hour. That gets the blood moving, the oxygen moving. You start making these endothelial progenitor cells. All this good things happens if you move. Try not to be sedentary. And if you want to add on to that, get on an exercise program, okay? I think everyone can get up and move every hour. You know, you can do that. Come on, that's something we can do, okay? Number 2, okay? Don't forget to drink some water. When you're dehydrated, that turns on stress. Stress turns on all sorts of chemical reactions, cause inflammation. So try to do that. Now, diet is a touchy issue for people. So, of course, plant-based diets are what I would recommend if you want to do everything perfect, and you can be happy doing that, and you don't turn to a grumpy old mean person, okay? But elephants are the happiest, well, I think they're happy, but they don't have heart attacks. They don't have heart attacks, they don't have strokes, they don't have a lot of disease. What do elephants do? They walk around and they take these things, what are these things called? Trunks. They hold each other by the trunk. They drink lots of water. They eat tons of plants. And they stay out in the sunshine and get vitamin D, and they move around a lot. And they live a long time, and they seem pretty happy. So I try to get people to eat more fruits, vegetables, nuts, and grains, as we saw in Genesis. And even if you don't like to do that, I try to bargain with people. I said, well, would you be willing to eat something green and a beet every day so you can walk across the room if you have angina? I usually can get that. I have a few people that say, I hate vegetables, okay? I will never eat a vegetable. So what I've got them to do now, because they're hurting so much and they can't function, I've got them to make smoothies where they put beet powder and they put flax and they put greens in there. They put it in some type of almond milk, soy milk combination. They whirl it around, and they'll drink one of those every day. Now, it doesn't make everything perfect, but I've seen it improve the situation enough that it's better than what they were doing before. And then if I can get them to do that, I say, listen, try not to eat the big meal at night. Try to do what I call intermittent fasting, or skip the big meal at night. What the big meal at night does is it sits in our gut too long, and our bodies can't rest. Our microbiome changes. We get more inflammation in the gut. That tends to damage a lot of things, and it gives our body the inability to rest. So remember, God designed us to have a certain amount of rest, not at night, but to have a weekly rest, both physically and spiritually, where we back off from all the work we've done and just let the body have an opportunity to heal itself. In our fast-paced society, whoever rests? And when I talked about people, would you like to take a day where you don't have to work? A lot of hands go up. Now, there's some people that are workaholics, and it's a little hard for them to do that. Okay? So those are some simple things. And lastly, deep breathing. And I encourage people to breathe deeply 5 or 10 minutes, 3 times a day. Breathe in, hold it 3 seconds, blow it out slow. What that does is it turns up the parasympathetic nervous system, which turns down stress chemistry. You can do it yourself, and you can feel your body relaxing. The heart rate slows down. The blood pressure comes down. Everything sort of gets better when you deep breathe and you don't relax. Now remember, when we stress breathe, we breathe very, very fast. And it gets everything going faster than it needs to. So those are some simple suggestions, and I hope 1 or 2 of these are something that you can take with you. But the most important one I wanted to save to last, and that's every morning when you get up, spend time with Christ. Ask him, say, hey, Lord, be my Lord and Savior. Forgive my sins. Give me the Holy Spirit. Let me come in the presence of God, and let me grow with you. Show me what your will is for me today. Just today. Show me what my place is here, and I want to thank you for promising me disease reversal and giving me this someday. And I want to praise you for the plan that you came up with to do away with this disease problem in general. And then build on that. Do that every day, and at the end of the day, I would find some time to do that as well. Whether it just be thank you or get your mind back in that, because as your mind rests, you don't want your mind going to the last thing you put in it, especially if it was something stressful or something you didn't need to be having. Because that affects your sleep pattern, your dopamine, your serotonin, the adrenaline, the melatonin in your brain. So there's some value in that text that says, come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I have a gift for you. I will give you rest. So I'm going to get out of the way. I know that there's another program coming right up, so I don't know who's in charge of that next program, but please feel free. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to be around to answer some questions for you. I'll be in the back for a while this evening if anyone you'd like to ask a specific questions, and I'm going to get them ready for their next Vesper program here. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.